over here. Yeah, you come here. This is part 2 of the Western Classical Music Iceberg. So if you haven't seen part 1 yet, go watch it right now. Watch it right now. Right now. Watch it right now. Also, this second video is going to be touching on some subjects that are, well, viewer discretion is advised for this next part. There's some subjects that are going to be a little bit more sensitive and tougher to talk about. So you've been warned. Viewer discretion is advised. Shaherazade. Nikolai Rimsky-Korsakov is a very famous, prolific composer, kind of the godfather of orchestration. He always knew the limitations of each instrument. He was willing to push the boundary of it. And he wrote this piece that was based off of 1001 Tales from Arabian Nights. He wrote, basically, it's like almost like a tone poem symphony, 4 movements based off of the character known as Shaherazade. It's a fun one. It's a fun little piece. Level 3, Fanfare for the Common Man. Aaron Copland is the guy who wrote Fanfare for the Common Man. He was this very prolific composer in the 1900s. So he's an American composer, and he kind of became the voice of American classical music, you know, kind of in that same vein that the New World Symphony was based off of. Fanfare for the Common Man is one of the most famous pieces he wrote, just for brass and some percussion. The Leningrad Symphony, Shastica 7.
Footage not found. Instead, we found actual footage from the siege at Leningrad.
Hildegard Bingen. Hildegard Bingen. She probably would kill me if she heard me say that. She is this insane woman, and she was kind of scary, but also awesome. She composed a lot of sacred chant-type music, but then she's also really well known for being, well, let me just read down the list here. A writer, a composer, of course. She was a philosopher, a mystic, a visionary. She worked with like medicinary stuff, so she was like a doctor. She was also really renowned for being kind of scary and hardcore, very nunnish. Freaking Hildegard, man. We all aspire to be like Hildegard someday. Okay, the secret theme to Enigma. Enigma Variants. It's written by Edward Elgar. The themes and variations, so each movement is based off of one theme, but it's kind of different interpretations of that one theme. The only thing with the theme, though, is he said that it's based off of something, but it was left up to mystery about what it is. There's a lot of theories about what the theme might be. It's still a mystery to this day, and no one really knows exactly where it came from and what the origin of it is. Nixon in China. John Adams. He's a very famous composer today. He wrote an opera that's one of my favorites called Nixon in China, and it's exactly what you think it's about. It's about Nixon's relations to China, opening relations to China. John Adams is known to make this kind of minimalist-inspired music that is just awesome to listen to. It's unique and interesting and gorgeous and awesome. And interesting enough with Nixon in China, it's in English, so they're, saying things like, I flew to Hawaii to get used to the time, that kind of thing. But it's really cool. It's a really cool opera, and I am a huge fan of it. The tragic sexuality of a bunch of composers. A lot of composers were homosexual, and they weren't able to express it because a lot of them were born in the times when that was literally against the law. For example, like just to name a few, Tchaikovsky, he famously was secretly closeted gay, and wrote his whole 4th Symphony off of him living this lie, and there's a lot of drama and sadness behind it, and just a lot of like anguish because he couldn't be himself and love what he wanted to love. A lot of these composers, they married someone of the opposite sex because they had to maintain a good image so that they could get work, so they could work and not get arrested, literally not get arrested. Tough times. I mean, even Leonard Bernstein was in that category too for years, closeted gay and, married a woman, but didn't come out until much later in his life. Percy Grainger is crazy. So who's Percy Grainger? Well, if you're in band, you know who Percy Grainger is because he's written a lot of music for military bands. He was a weirdo. You can look up and see a bunch of his stuff. He made his own clothes. He was very, very, very racist. He's had a weird relationship with his mother. And there's just a lot going on with that guy. And honestly, that's a whole video on its own. So maybe in the future I'll make a video about Percy Grainger, but for now, just know that he's crazy. Curse of the Ninth. Great composers, after they compose their 9th symphony, perish. They die. After their 9th, their greatest work is when they pass away. Very famous examples of this are Beethoven, of course, Bruckner, Dvorak, and famously Mahler. He was very superstitious about his 9th symphony, and he thought, I can't write my 9th symphony because I don't want to die. But just like the legend goes, he finally wrote his Ninth Symphony, and what do you know? Soon thereafter, he perished. He started writing his 10th, but he couldn't quite finish it. Level 4! The Mahler Hammer. So in Mahler's Sixth Symphony, the Tragic Symphony, he has these hammer blows that happen with this giant hammer blows. You've seen videos of it happen, the thunk, you see that happen a lot, and you're like, oh, there's the guy. Well, those things were actually huge. So the hammer blows, for original transcript of Mahler's Sixth Symphony, he wrote 3 hammer blows, just that are supposed to represent tragic moments of his life. The first blow represented the death of his oldest daughter, and the rest of them were going to represent other horrible, tragic events that happened in his life, like condition of his heart, which caused his death, and just the death of other people. And he thought that, my music is causing, some tragic stuff happening in my own life. So he wrote out the other 2 hammer strikes, because the first one already came true. Symphony of Sorrowful Songs. Górecki, he was a Polish composer, and he wrote his 3rd symphony. It's called the Symphony of Sorrowful Songs, and it's 3 movements. And I actually talked about this pretty hardcore in my 10 pieces that go hard video. The words that are written for the soloist to sing in each thing represents something tough and tragic, whether it be like the loss of a child, or a daughter saying it's going to be all right to her mother who is about to die in a Gestapo prison. That's the true story. The second movement of this, the lyrics that are written were scribbled onto the wall of a Gestapo prison. And it was going to be this lady's final moments before her death, but luckily she got out before it actually happened. But he got those from the scribbled walls in a Gestapo prison. You can't make that stuff up. It's crazy. Check it out and you're going to cry. And it's great. If you like crying. Alexander Nevsky. There's a man named Sergei Prokofiev. He was very well renowned for his film music. He wrote the music for this movie called Alexander Nevsky, which is about this ancient Russian hero that represents the ideals of the Soviet Union and communism and whatever, And it was this patriotic movie that they would play as kind of propaganda to get people pumped to defend their nation. The famous piece in it is the Battle on the Ice, and it's just epic. John Cage, his other stuff. So John Cage, earlier I mentioned in level 2 that he wrote 4 minutes and 33 seconds, the all-silent piece. He also wrote other things. And one of the most famous things that he wrote was music for prepared piano. Prepared piano being a piano that's been prepared in a very specific way. Maybe like coins put into specific spots to kind of lock up some strings. It creates this very interesting sound, and then when it's being played, it kind of has almost like this percussive feel to it. My friend in college, Creston, if you're watching this, you said this to me and it's never escaped me. He described it as Jack and Daxter music, which is perfect. That's the perfect way to describe it. It sounds like music from the video game Jack and Daxter. Dang it, Creston. Alright, Voyager Golden Record. The Voyager is, of course, a famous satellite. They said goodbye forever to it, and one of the things they did for it is when they get lost communication with it, it's just going to go off. And if there is intelligent life out there, they decided to include this record, the Golden Record, and it has pictures, a bunch of pictures on it that are like from humanity, kind of explaining what we are, and a lot of it includes a lot of music, and music from all around the world, like Gamelan, Indonesian-type classical music, Beethoven's Fifth is in there, I think, like some classical guitar stuff, and then bird sounds and that kind of thing, and it's supposed to be like an educational, like, hey, here we are, we exist, and this is our humanity. It actually came out as an actual record. 12-tone. The concept is that when you play one note, like on a piano, you can't play that note until you played every other note. It creates kind of like this sound. Kind of horrifying. It's a modern technique, and it kind of is the basis for atonality. A lot of atonal composers use it. It's a very odd way of composition, and the idea of it was that it was breaking kind of the conventions that the Bachian Western classical style has created. And did it succeed? Dsch. Okay, so this is my final Shostakovich thing to mention. Dsch is the signature that he would put into his music to say that it's him. It was his way of writing something that was personal. It was his way of saying, hey, this is stupid. I don't want to be part of the, this is my way of self-expression. Dsch, in Russian notation, it translates to D. Wow! The notes are D, E flat, C, and B. That's what it translates into in the English notation of music. He would put this in a bunch of his works to kind of represent, hey, I'm writing this, I'm my own individual, and I am being oppressed, and this is not good. Shostakovich is a very interesting topic. The most unwanted song. I also made a video about this. Just check out that video. It explains everything. The most unwanted song being a song created from a survey and a poll from a bunch of people about things they don't want in music, and they put all of it together and created this kind of tune that is featuring things like an operatic soprano rapping, children singing about Walmart, a bunch of other just crazy, funny, weird things, politics. Frank Zappa. Frank Zappa, of course, is the famous rock and roll god from the 70s and 80s and a little bit of the 90s. So Zappa was very, very, very interested in modern composition, in modern music when he was just a kid. So one of the things that he did is he was interested in music like Varese, that he, on Frank Zappa's 15th birthday, he did a long-distance call to talk to the composer Varese, pick his brain and get to know him. And unfortunately, he was in tour of Europe at the time, but his wife answered and talked about how his interest in his music is just fantastic. But because of that phone call when he was 15, Varese himself, when he got back, wrote him a letter, and Frank Zappa famously framed it and kept it with him forever, wherever he went. He was 15 and he was listening to really heavy-duty atonal music. Level 5. So level 5, it begins with Moondog. Moondog was this homeless guy who would busk on the streets between 52 and 55th Street in New York City. And he was kind of considered, he was called a lot of time the Viking of 6th Avenue. And it's because he dressed like a Viking, he was blind, and he would just be, here's a picture of him, he was just crazy. But what people didn't know about him was that he was also a very prolific composer. He wrote a lot of music, he invented a lot of instruments, and he was actually the direct inspiration for a lot of composers today that we all study, know, and care about, like Philip Glass or Steve Reich. He is a fascinating guy. I would love to make a video about him someday. So, Jeremiah Clark's Suicide. Who's Jeremiah Clark? Well, he wrote Trumpet Voluntary. He was in love with a beautiful young woman, and she was way out of his league, and she wasn't interested in him. And it drove him literally mad and insane. There were moments where he wasn't going to do it, and then he felt fine, and then everyone was afraid that he was going to do it, and then he finally did it. Berlioz's Triple Murder. So, for Berlioz's Triple Murder, it's such a weird thing to say, there's a lady named Camille Moke who was a very talented piano player, fell in love deeply with Berlioz, but he was not successful. She was very much in love with him. He didn't quite reciprocate that quite just yet, but he eventually did become a bit smitten for her. Then her mother, Camille's mother, Madame Moke, opposed the idea of those two getting married because he wasn't successful. He didn't have money. He was not a successful composer at that time. And so she went, no thank you, not good. And as the years went on, they broke it off and he moved to Italy, probably with the intention of eventually, I'm going to get that girl. I need to make something successful so that they can get married. But while he was in Italy, he got a letter. This lady that he was in love with, this piano player, was going to be wed to a very successful man. He was the heir to a very prestigious piano manufacturing company. And so she was going to be married into money and all that stuff. And so the letter just basically was like, ha, you lost. And that made Berlioz very furious and angry and bloodthirsty. He loaded up 2 pistols, and he got a housemaid's clothing to be a disguise for him to get in to where they were, and he was going to kill all of them. Triple murder. The innocent guy who had nothing to do with anything, Camille, and the mom, and then afterwards he was going to kill himself as well. And it was going to be this act of passionate anger. Fortunately, it didn't actually happen. Alright, no more of this murder nonsense. Stockhausen, the tent composition. So, who is Karl-Heinz Stockhausen? He was a very controversial, crazy composer-man who pioneered a lot of electronics in music and a lot of spatial awareness. Very out there, crazy music. And one in particular that comes to mind for me that I love to mention is this piece that he wrote called Trumpet Tent. The idea of this is very hard to play. It's a performance art trumpet piece. And the idea of it is that there's this tent. These 4 trumpet players are inside. and they're playing some of the hardest music that's ever been written for trumpet. The only way they can keep time is kind of to like tap their feet kind of on each other's feet. Of course, I put a trumpet thing at the end of this thing, so there you go. There's my little iceberg. If you like this video, please let me know. And do you want me to go deeper? Do you want me to go into some different icebergs, kind of go hard on like some of the ones that are on Reddit, the famous ones? Let me know, and I'd be willing to do it. Just tell me. And if you have any other things, please let me know in the comments. Subscribe and to do that stuff. And yeah.